Hello, everyone. So happy to be here. Really happy to be here with Adam Silver to talk for a few minutes about not just basketball, but the economic power of sports. You know, this is a room of people who invest and lead, and I would love for you to help them understand how sports can be an economic and business catalyst.
Well, thanks, Jason, and wonderful to see all of you. You know, Mike Bloomberg began this morning by saying we're all here to change the world. And I know you and I were doing something with a group of African investors earlier this morning, and many of you are aware that Nelson Mandela famously said, sport has the power to change the world. I'm almost sure when he said that, he wasn't thinking of change the world from an economic standpoint. It was more in terms of the spirit of the people. But now, jump ahead all these years to the present, we're now, on a global basis, sports has become a trillion-dollar sector of the economy. And it's because, in addition to the human connections that come from sports, the enormous goodwill, the empathy we build from very different cultures, that it has become an economic engine. And not just the teams themselves, but for our sport, the arena development.
Right.
And many of you are familiar with it in the United States, where, think of that LA Live, it's really where it began, where it's not just the arena, but it's commercial development, residential, retail, et cetera, and increasingly going into areas of cities that are in badly need of investment. And then these teams become anchor tenants, and then often these arenas will have 250 separate events or so. So standalone great businesses. What we were saying earlier today around Africa, for example, I would say that's one continent where they have not experienced the level of sport investment as other places in the world. But on the other hand, I mean, it's just an amazing data point that the UN is estimating in just 25 years from now, 40% of the young people in the world will live in Africa.
Right.
And so we see as the NBA an amazing opportunity to build the sport there, to build an arena infrastructure. And we've, with credit to David Stern, my predecessor, who back in 2001 said we need to plant a flag in Africa. We opened an office in South Africa. We now have 5 offices in Africa, and roughly 6 years ago, we created a league in Africa called Basketball Africa League because we saw that opportunity to build the sport and build economic development as well.
And so how does that work from this? I'm fascinated by this nexus of sort of investment and sport and where the investment opportunities are. You're going to sell franchises in Africa, I believe. We've seen that be a very successful business here in the United States. Clara Wusai was with us.
Right.
What she and Joe have done, with the Nets and the Liberty, these are multi-billion-dollar businesses. Do you see the potential for multi-billion-dollar franchises eventually at other places around the world?
I do. I mean, I'll come to, clearly in Europe, for example,
Yes.
there are multi-billion-dollar franchises. Just return to Africa for a second. I think over time, absolutely, there's no reason that those franchises shouldn't have the same global values you see franchise in the United States and you do in Europe. I would say in the shorter term, millions of dollars of value,
Sure.
no question, behind these teams.
But a growth investment, really.
But a growth investment. So we have a partnership. Our federation is FIBA, and so they are our partners in Africa. And what we did in terms of this initial launch of the league, we took existing clubs, and those clubs are playing as part of this Basketball Africa League. So our plan has always been, once we established that arena construction has began in Rwanda, President Kagame in Kigali, we have a state-of-the-art arena there. Senegal, Johannesburg, we see enormous opportunity to build additional arenas. And the thought is now that rather than take these existing clubs, that we are going to market with an opportunity to sell 12 franchises, 12 newly minted franchises, with the opportunity to build an arena complex with those franchises. Right. Again, presumably the arena becomes the anchor tenant for that arena, And then as we talk to other entertainment properties, that a lot of touring acts, if they can then go to the continent and tour, the economies change,
right,
as opposed to a one-off event in Lagos or whatever else, or in Dakar. If you can then come and you can tour through several cities in 18,000 person arenas, that changes the economics for them as well.
And as you say, these sort of ecosystems that grow up around the arenas themselves, you think about LA Live, you think about what, we were with Grant Hill earlier today, the investment that he's doing with Tony Ressler and Richard Ressler down in Atlanta around Centennial Yards. We've seen it in Milwaukee is a great example as well. Let's talk about Europe. Of late, you have been talking a lot about expansion. What does that look like, and how do you, that's not sort of a greenfield situation. There are existing teams. How do you sort of merge into and create something that's complementary to the existing infrastructure there?
Right. So what we're looking at in Europe, again, completely independent from Africa, is that there's a very strong sport infrastructure there, largely built around soccer. It's football, obviously, they're called soccer to make it easier, and rugby and other sports. But basketball is the second most played sport in the world after soccer, and is highly developed in Europe. I mean, several of our most recent MVPs are European. Think of Luka Doncic,
right?
Jokic, etc. I mean, there's Victor Wembanyama. I mean, huge stars, coming now out of Europe. An enormous amount of basketball being played in Europe, and there are country leagues, and there's something called the Euro League, which is a pan-European league. And it's something, I've been with the NBA for over 30 years, and while we're a huge Olympic sport, and as I said, enormous development of players, in some cases, more sophisticated development systems than the United States in terms of developing multifaceted, talented players. From a commercial standpoint, we haven't seen the kind of development you've seen, particularly in the United States. There are not many state-of-the-art arenas in Europe. It's like, even for those who were over in Paris last summer for the Olympics, we had fantastic basketball competition in the Bercy Arena in Paris. It was they revitalized it to a certain extent for the Olympics, but if you're in the industry, everything seems fine if you're in the seats and watching the competition on the floor, but it doesn't have the suites, the restaurants, the back-of-house room to do larger events. And that's Paris, of course. London has the O2, which has been a great advancement in Europe, but that arena is now already old, and they're looking at a new development. So we think there's the opportunity to go in the major European capitals, again, with a joint proposition, both arena development, a multi-use facility, and all the opportunities around it, but then a little different than Africa, we think there's opportunity both to create new teams and in some cases take existing franchises. Often in Europe, think of it like college sports in the United States. You have soccer paired with other sports, all under the same brand.
Right.
Real Madrid has great basketball. FC Barcelona has great basketball, but of course they're known for their soccer. Alba Berlin. You look around Europe. So we're also talking to some existing clubs about the opportunity to then bring their teams into this new league, but also in certain markets create brand new teams.
All right. So less than a minute to go. As you look out, I mean, do you envision sort of one global league where there's like players moving around, or is it sort of a confederation of related leagues? It's
a great question. I think initially, I think confederation is the perfect word. I mean, I can imagine certainly initially in Europe that, for example, we have something we call the NBA Cup, a mid-season tournament. You could imagine teams from Europe, potentially Africa, competing in that tournament. You possibly could see teams coming into our playoffs, top seeds from other leagues. But over time, I think, for example, certainly in Europe, as plane travel gets faster, it sort of went backwards with the elimination of the Concorde, but I'm reading all the time about more opportunities in aviation. When I think of the flight from New York to LA, for example, there's no reason, if we had 4 teams in Europe, you couldn't travel, play, the Knicks or Nets, travel to London, play 3-4 times in Europe, come back home. So I think it's very doable in our league.
All right. Well, we can't wait to see what you do next with the NBA. Adam Silver, thank you so much.